Well, hey guys, it's Libby, and today I'm doing my April reading wrap up. I am aware that it's been almost 3 years since I last posted a booktube video, and I am going to do a video about where I've been, what I've been doing, but I wanted to start with just some good old-fashioned classic content. So we're doing a reading wrap-up. Also, I have books that I want to tell you about, and we're getting pretty close to the end of May, so I need to get this April wrap-out up before it loses relevancy. One note is that one of the reasons I left BookTube was that the editing time was just becoming onerous. So this video will not be edited. So there may be occasional stumblings or pauses while I try to figure out what I think about things. Thank you for indulging me. So in April, I read 10 books. 6 of them were historical romance. I also read one work of nonfiction, one work of, I guess the genre is romantic suspense. And then we're checking what other books I read. One work of literary fiction and one medieval long-form poem. So let's get right into it. I'm actually going to go slightly out of order in order to keep series together, in order to keep a series together. So for the purposes of this video, the first thing that I finished in April was The Botany of Desire, A Plant's Eye View of the World by Michael Pollan. You've probably heard of Michael Pollan. You've probably heard of The Botany of Desire. I think his most famous work is The Omnivore's Dilemma. So if you aren't familiar with this work, you'll know it. You'll know him from that. So this is a book in 4 very long chapters, each of which focuses on a plant, and it has as its thesis that, unlike what we think, humans are not picking the qualities of plants that we like and selectively breeding for them. Rather, or at least an additional way of viewing it, is that plants are intentionally giving humans the things that they want in order to propagate themselves, in order to succeed genetically on their own terms. And the 4 plants, each chapter is dedicated to a plant, which gives humans one particular thing that they really like. So apples give us sweetness, tulips give us beauty, marijuana, cannabis, gives us intoxication, and potatoes don't exactly give us control, but potatoes give us a field upon which we can exercise our control. The first chapter I thought was really interesting and really successful. Hooray for apples. The other 3 chapters I thought were really interesting. I liked hearing all of Michael Pollan's work on sort of the history of human interaction with these plants, of the biology and biochemistry involved in like how they produce the things that we want. And also he talks about his own adventures in growing these various plants in his own garden, including one time when he had some marijuana plants growing in his backyard, not super intentionally, but the county sheriff, I believe, was dropping off a cord of wood at his house and insisted that he leave them in the barn. That he leave the wood in the barn from which the plants were visible. And Michael had to panic and pull them out and stuff them into a trash bag before the county sheriff could see them. So RIP those particular plants. So I really liked the 3 later chapters, but I think they were less convincing. I was less convinced of his thesis in them. To me, it really seemed like humans were selectively breeding tulips, marijuana, potatoes for their own purposes. And I was having a harder time seeing marijuana as intentionally producing more THC in order to get us to take care of them. So I gave Botany of Desire 4 stars. I also, while I was off BookTube, I have decided to introduce a secondary rating system. I thought about completely replacing stars, but I think that system is too entrenched to totally get rid of. So I'm going to keep the star ratings, and that's just going to be my personal opinion of the book. I then want to introduce a rating system that is more action-oriented for my viewers. So it has 4 tiers. Top tier is drop everything. That means this is one of the best books I've ever read. Whatever you are reading right now is probably not as good as this book. So I recommend putting aside whatever your current read is and picking up this book. It will be worth it. Second tier is TBR, which is, this is a good book. I think you will like it. I think you should read it eventually. Maybe, don't wait too long for it to fall into your hands. Be active about seeking it out, but you do not need to drop everything in order to read this book. It is not life-changing. Third tier is library maybe, which means if you sound like the target market for this book, then keep it on your radar. Maybe don't spend money to acquire it, but you would probably be interested in this book. But this is also a tier for like books that aren't for everybody. And then the lowest tier is pass, which is, I don't think you should read this book. So Botany of Desire, 4 stars for me, and for you, I think you should put it on your TBR. The next book I read, I have a physical copy of. I finally got to 9 Coaches Waiting by Mary Stewart. This I decided to read because it's very highly recommended for fans of Daphne du Maurier, and I think it does come pretty close to living up to that. This is a little bit more pulpy than du Maurier. She's a little bit more literary, but this was still fun and enjoyable. So, what's going on? Our heroine, who I guess this woman on this very old cover is supposed to be our heroine, but she is not nearly this glamorous. I don't know who this person is supposed to be. Our heroine, Linda, is an English woman who was raised in France, so she speaks French fluently. She takes a governess position in France and disguises the fact that she can also speak French because her employers seem interested in having a governess who cannot speak French. So she becomes the governess to the 9-year-old Philippe le Comte de Valmy. Philip, the Count of Valmy. I can keep holding this up. I don't know. How am I going to format this? I'm going to put it down for now. She's the governess to this 9-year-old count whose parents recently died in a plane crash, which Linda can sympathize with because her parents also died in a plane crash. This book was published in 1957. I don't know if plane crashes, if dying in planes was way more common back then. Probably a little bit, but slightly weird that there have been 2 back-to-back plane crashes. And he is living with his aunt and uncle who, well, I don't want to spoil things. So let's just say that a series of increasingly concerning events happen while Linda is at the Chateau de Valmy. I thought this book was fun and interesting. It succeeds in being suspenseful. It is very suspenseful and engaging. I think part of the reason this book benefited from my ignorance of the genre. I haven't read any other mid-century, like, suspense novels. So I wasn't sure. I didn't have any expectations of, like, how books like this are supposed to go. So I was more surprised about how things were going. So initially, it seems like we're setting up a suspect and a motive for what's going on. But I didn't know if that was a red herring or if I was just smart enough to put the fairly straightforward pieces together. And then when we got to the end, we got to like the last 20 pages, and it seemed like, we had done all of the exciting stuff. Things were going to wrap up, and I was sort of settling for the end of the book and the conclusions and maybe an epilogue. But in the last 20 pages, like, something else very exciting happens, and we have to run off and deal with that. And then in the last 3 pages, something else exciting happens, and we have to run off and deal with that. So it does keep you engaged right to the very end. So I gave 9 Coaches Waiting 4 stars, and also I recommend that you put this on your TBR. Okay, now getting into the historical romance. As you guys may know, I'm a fan of Tessa Dare. Tessa Dare has been away from the book community even longer than I have. The book that she's currently working on, The Bride Bet, was supposed to come out, I believe, in 2020, and it still has not come out, and we do not have a release date. So I'm officially giving up. I'm not saying that I don't think it is going to come out, but I am going to stop having hope and expectations for its eventual release. A tragedy. So I was looking at people who appear to be similar to Tessa Dare. I was looking for a Tessa Dare substitute. And one of the recommendations is Alexandra Vasti. She has a couple of traditionally published works. I did not read those. I read 4 novellas by her. 3 of which are now traditionally published, but started out as being available on her newsletter, through her newsletter, and 1 that is still available for free through her newsletter. So these have not been through a professional editing process. The last one, definitely. The first 3 may have been through a professional editing process, but maybe they're just being published as they were. So I am willing to accept that this is not her best work. But let's get into it. The books I read, the first 3, were the Halifax Hellions series, which are, they have very fun names, in which Margot Halifax earns her shocking reputation, in which Matilda Halifax learns the value of restraint, and in which Winnie Halifax is utterly ruined. They kind of gave up on the title for the last one. I think the other 2 are more exciting. So this is a series of 3 novellas about 3 siblings who, and these books all take place at the same time. They do not, it's not, one ends and then the next one begins. So Margot's story, what's going on there? Margot and her sister Matilda are known as the Halifax Hellions. This is a Regency era historical romance, if I didn't mention, just to give you the right mindset. She and her sister Matilda are the Halifax Hellions, who do all sorts of scandalous things. They smoke cigars. They go on horse races through the streets of London. Maybe they fought a duel at some point. They're doing all sorts of ridiculous, scandalous things. And Margot's story begins with Margot hammering on the door of her brother's friend, Henry Mortimer. Henry is a lawyer. And she needs Henry to help her chase down her sister Matilda, who has apparently eloped with the scandalous Christian de Bourgh, who has rumors circulating about him that he murdered his first wife. So we can't abandon Matilda to this horrible man. Henry has been in love with Margot since he met her, but he is too embarrassed to say anything about this. Also, there's a class situation. Their brother, Spencer, is an earl, and Henry is a common lawyer, so he daren't to look so high. And he's like, oh, you want me to be in a carriage with you as we spend multiple days going up to Scotland to prevent this elopement? I don't think I can do that. I'm going to lose my mind and probably say something dumb. But eventually, Margot convinces him to go with her, and they head north in search of Matilda. I think I'm going to give you the synopsis for all of them and then get into my review. So, meanwhile, Matilda Her story is meaningfully longer. I would say, yeah, the Margot story is definitely a novella. It is quite short. Matilda and Winnie/Spencer's stories are short novels. They're a good bit longer. So Matilda is not quite as lively and vivacious and desirous of the spotlight as her sister Margot, but she's happy to go along with all of her sister's mad schemes. But she does have one secret scandalous thing that she doesn't share with the world, which is that she draws the illustrations for one of London's most notorious dirty books publishers. And she is confronted by the scandalous Christian de Bourgh for having drawn him into one of her dirty books. She insists that and he knows that it's him because the character has a beard, which he has and is not very common in the early 19th century. And he also has the same tattoo on his rump. Matilda says that she did not draw him. The beard and the tattoo were added later by somebody else. But she eventually confesses that she was thinking of him when she drew this picture. So in a way, it is a picture of him. She wants to make amends. Christian was already pretty scandalous and people didn't want to hang out with him. But this illustration was the final straw for his sister's painting teacher, who has now quit. And leaving his sister despondent that she will no longer be able to learn to paint. So Matilda is an artist. And so she offers to take the place of his sister's tutor. His sister lives in the north of England. So they head up there and she takes up the position. The third book, which you may think of as Winnie's story or as Spencer's story, Spencer is the other sibling. He is the brother of Margot and Matilda, who has been sort of inexplicably in Wales during his sister's stories. So we find out why he is in Wales. I believe Alexandra Vasti did not originally intend to write this book, but when the other two came out, everyone was like, well, oops, I hit the mic, sorry. Everyone's like, well, what was their brother doing? So she wrote what their brother was doing. In the prologue to this book, a Miss Winifred Wallace attempts to get land in Wales that she can use as a sheep farm. She is recently of age, and her mother has abandoned her. Her mother was a demi-mondaine, a courtesan who stole valuable jewelry from the men she was seeing / their wives. So her mother left Winnie 3 of the necklaces she stole and fled to France because she was about to be caught. So Winnie needs to go plow her own future. Jesus, forge her own future. She's running a farm. Maybe she's plowing it. She's shearing her own future. So she needs to get land in order to raise her sheep because she's a fan of sheep. And she can't get the land because she is an unmarried woman, so no one will rent it to her. So she says, oh, well, I actually am married. My husband and I are just estranged, so now can I have the land? And they're like, oh, sure. Just, do you have a marriage certificate? So she sneaks into a church, forges a marriage certificate, writes just any name, and the name that comes to mind is Spencer Halifax. She doesn't know that this is a real person, and she gets her land and spends 10 years happily raising sheep and selling yarn. Eventually, Henry, our hero from the first book, a lawyer, figures out what's going on. He sees advertisements for her yarn and sees that due to some complex bureaucratic and loss of paperwork stuff, the forged certificate may actually be legally binding, and Spencer Halifax, Earl of whatever, may in fact be legally married to sheep farmer Winnie Halifax. So Spencer is going to Wales to figure out what's going on. When he gets there, he gets there, pulls her out of jail for an unrelated cause, and they decide to go back to London to work with Henry and other lawyers to sort out their situation. Winnie is very apologetic and says, I didn't know this was a real person. I was not trying to make your life more difficult. So they get back to London, and Henry's not there. Instead, there is a letter saying, hey, your sister and I have gone north to rescue your other sister from an elopement. And Spencer's like, gosh, it never rains, but it pours. So they have to hang out and wait for Henry to come back so that they can deal with their own situation. Meanwhile, Winnie is like, this is the perfect chance to return the necklaces that my mother stole. So a lot of the plot is actually hijinks around getting these necklaces back in the hands of the people that her mother stole them from. So that's all you need to know for the plot. I thought these books were fine. I was not super impressed. The Margot story, it is the shortest, and it's also kind of a nothing burger. It's too short for anything to meaningfully happen. So I would say maybe just like skip it and go on to Matilda's story if it sounds interesting to you. Unfortunately, there is a confrontation between the two sisters, and the text of that is only in Margot's story. So if you skip to Matilda's, you're going to miss a meaningful chunk of their relationship with each other. So, yeah, I gave, in which Margot Halifax earns her shocking reputation, 3 stars. I would say for you guys, this is a library maybe. For Margot, sorry, I'm mixing them up. That's the point. They're also identical twins, if I did forget to mention that. Matilda Halifax, there's a bit more there. It's a little bit more intriguing and engaging. So I gave this 3.5. I'd say this is also a library maybe for you. And in which Winnie Halifax is utterly ruined, I did feel like was kind of a dud. This one was really guilty of these historical characters having modern thought processes. So, for example, Spencer, he and Winnie are falling in love with each other as they live in London, as one does. Spencer keeps thinking, I can't propose marriage to her because she'll feel like she has to say yes because of... I can't exactly remember the reason, but she'll feel like she has to say yes. And I can't pull her away from her sheep farm to become a countess. She's a strong, independent woman with her own career. And I'm like, no 19th century person would ever think she doesn't want to continue laboring for a living. She wants to be an aristocrat. Gosh. And I also, the necklace situation did not make any sense. When she brings up the situation to Spencer, he says, well, why didn't you just mail the necklaces anonymously if you didn't want to reveal yourself and potentially get yourself and your mother in trouble by saying that she had stolen the necklaces? She says, well, I couldn't mail them to anyone because I didn't have the addresses. And so that made sense then, but why can't she mail them now? Because Spencer, is moving in the spheres with these people. He presumably knows or could easily figure out their addresses. Why just mail them now instead of doing these, ridiculous hijinks involving, sneaking into the coat room during a dinner party and luring people out of their opera box? Why is this happening? Why not just mail them? I'm pretty sure this is just a plot hole. And finally, this is a very Libby complaint, but Alexandra Vasti does not have any idea how historical clothing works. The thing that really got to me was she keeps describing dresses as closing with hooks and eyes under the armpit, which 1, is not historically accurate, 2, is the stupidest way to close a garment. That's the most difficult place to reach. It's almost impossible to put your clothes on and off by yourself at that point. And if someone else is putting your clothes on, they have to like stick their face in your armpit in a world before deodorant exists in order to get the dress closed. Finally, under the arm is a very high friction area. You're moving your arm back and forth across it a lot. So if you have those like bumps from the hooks and eyes making it stick out further, you're just going to wear the fabric down really fast. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and I don't know how she got the notion that this is how clothing worked. It's frustrating that descriptions of clothing are more accurate in romance novels from like the 80s and 90s. And they're so bad now. Alexandra Vasti is not the only person who doesn't understand how historical clothing works. But now you can just go on YouTube and Prior Attire, Carolina Zabrowska, Crow's Eye Productions, many more. All of these people will tell you show you step by step how people got dressed in various historical eras and what the clothing looked like. You have no excuses. And I know this wasn't professionally edited. Or actually, I'm not sure if these ones were professionally edited. But professional editors of historical romance novels, even if the authors don't know, you have to know. You have to figure this out and make sure they get it right. Jesus Christ. Anyway, in which Winnie Halifax is utterly ruined, I gave like 3 stars, and that's generous. And I would say, honestly, pass for this one. So I read 3 Alexandra Vasti books that I didn't really like, so obviously then I read another one. I had kind of pre-decided that I was going to read these 4 books by her, and then no matter how bad the ones I read were, I was not to be discouraged. So I read a standalone novella, not in the Halifax series, called The Chemistry of Familiar Objects. Also a Regency romance. This one had a really exciting premise. So our characters, what are their names? Emmeline and Robert are sharing a building in London for office space. They don't live there. He, on the ground floor, has a printing press where he makes children's books, and she, on the upper floor, has a chemistry laboratory where she makes all sorts of exciting explosions, which is really upsetting for Robert down below. So they haven't been getting along very well. So when Winnie finally comes in, when Emmeline finally comes into her inheritance, she decides to buy the building outright and evict Robert. He is very upset about this and manages just barely to negotiate to stay 11 days till the end of the month, which is the rent that he has already paid for because he needs time to take his machines apart and take them somewhere else. So that's all very interesting, and I wanted to hear more about it. Then we hear upstairs some men breaking into Emmeline's laboratory, and they appear to have stolen a chemical that could potentially be used as a weapon to help Napoleon. Oh no, we have to get it back and or inform the Home Office so that they can alert Wellington. And once this happens, we completely forget about the premise. Anything about them, their conflict over their shared office space, or the fact that Robert is going to be evicted in a decreasing number of days, doesn't ever come up again. And I just can't believe it's like a Simpsons episode where the intro was written in a different way by a different person than the main part of the story. I just couldn't believe that, like, you know, they're clearly falling in love and making out, and Robert never says, so, are you still kicking me out? And now it's, 9 days? An absolute disappointment. So I gave 3 stars to The Chemistry of Familiar Objects. I would say this one is library maybe. The adventurous plot is still kind of fun. I just wish it had something to do with the initial premise. Okay, then all done with Alexandra Vasti, I went to a reliable favorite historical romance novel. I read Christmas Beau by Mary Balogh. It's April, so obviously the perfect time to read Christmas books. So I can't remember the man's name, but he is the Marquis of Denby, so we're just going to call him Denby. Our heroine is named Judith. This is also a Regency romance, and this is older. This is 1991. It is not a bodice ripper. I would say it's more in the tradition of Georgette Heyer. So 8 years before our story is taking place, our hero and heroine were in an arranged marriage that had been set up by their parents. They didn't really know each other, but when they first met, the Marquis fell head over heels in love with his fiancée, but he wanted to be very, very polite and respectful, so he didn't really indicate this. And Judith read this as him being very cold and reserved and didn't really like her. So a week before they were supposed to be married, she eloped with another man, breaking his heart, although she didn't know this. It is now 8 years later. Judith is a widow with 2 children, and Denby sees this as his chance to take his revenge. He is going to make her fall in love with him and then break her heart just as she did to him. I think that a lot of people won't like this book. I did like this book. I could see people feeling like this is just sort of a nothing burger. I could also see people not liking that, like, the guy is mean. Although, guy is mean seems to be very common in the modern romance scene. And this is not really normally something that I am interested in. But I did feel like we had a reason that made sense for him to be mean. Like, he is actually really upset that she jilted him. And we do get a bit of him reconsidering if this is actually what he wants to do. And now that he's gotten her to fall in love with him, maybe that's just great. Maybe that's the end of the story and they can finally get married. So I gave this 4 stars as my personal rating, but for you guys, I'd say it's a library maybe. Okay. Then, out of nowhere, I read my new favorite book. I read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight by Anonymous. We don't know his name. I've seen him called the Gawain Poet. If you are following the podcast that I do with my spouse David, we did talk about David Lowery's film, The Green Knight, and I wanted to read the original source material, which had been sort of percolating through my TBR for many years. But the fact that we were going to watch the film lit the fire inside me and made me decide to read it. So I opted for the Benedict Flynn translation. I did look at the Middle English text, and it's completely inscrutable. It's harder than Chaucer. You can't read it unless you are specifically trained in Middle English. So I got the Benedict Flynn translation, and I listened to the audiobook. So the story. The story is, we're at King Arthur's court, it's Christmas Day, a green knight, a man with green skin, green armor, green everything, walks in and issues a challenge to the Knights of the Round Table and says, I will give you this lovely axe if you can strike a blow against me in combat, and on the condition that in 1 year's time, I can deal you an equal blow. So Gawain takes him up on the offer. He's ready to enter combat with the Green Knight when the Green Knight unexpectedly kneels down and presents his neck. Gawain is kind of confused and decides to cut off the Green Knight's head. He's like, well, this is creepy and I want it to end. Imagine his surprise when the Green Knight then stands and picks up his head and says, well, see you next year. So at the very beginning, we get this really exciting premise, or this really exciting like point of tension that in 1 year, Gawain's gonna die. Gawain's gonna get his head cut off. He does have this fun axe though. So, yeah, then most of the story is Gawain's journey to the Green Chapel where he will face the Green Knight. The plot is intriguing and exciting. The language, though, the prose, is so beautiful. It is like velvet. It is like swimming through a pool of chocolate ganache. I cannot explain how luxurious it felt to be listening to this. There's sort of three different poetic elements going on all at once. So you've got, and these were all in the original, you've got the rhyme, the meter, and alliteration. And I think alliteration in the past couple of decades has gotten a reputation for being a lowly element of poetry. I don't know if this has to do with the fact that alliteration is part of the Old and Middle English poetic traditions, and at some point we decided that like classical and French and Italian poetry was better, which doesn't normally use alliteration. But yeah, alliteration is great and more people should use it. I loved it. It was very compelling, very driving. I was so excited. The audiobook is only 2 hours, and I could have listened to it for 20. So I rated this 5 stars. I would rate it 6 if I could, and this book may possibly be the only book that gets this ranking for you, and that is drop everything. Whatever you're reading right now, probably not as good as Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I'm honestly kind of disappointed that we wrote the best book at the end of the 14th century, and no one has done anything better since. That is slightly disappointing, but at least we still have the book. Okay, then I read a work of literary fiction. I read An Artist of the Floating World by Kazuo Ishiguro. I had previously read one other Ishiguro. I read Remains of the Day, and I think this book is an interesting pairing with that book. They're both about middle-aged to older men living in the 1950s, post-World War II. And they're sort of reflecting on the events of World War II and realizing that they actually maybe were more in the center of things than they realized. So this is very much a work of literary fiction. There's kind of no plot to tell you about. It's about our protagonist, who is an unreliable narrator. So if that's something you're excited about, go for it. He seems to be like consciously writing this story. He is sort of addressing the reader. What's his name? Masuji Ono. So the artist Masuji Ono is reflecting on his career. He is now considered a pretty respectable, a highly respected painter. But there are several people who seem to not like him, and he's sort of confused about this. So it's about sort of figuring out what all of that's about, and also dealing with his family, his daughters and grandson, and not really his wife. They're not really interested in his wife. So definitely one for people who enjoy literary fiction that are more meandering and don't have a plot. Big caveat to that one. I gave this book 3.5 stars. That's my personal rating. I would call this one library maybe, but it's at the top of library maybe. It's approaching TBR. And for the final book of the month, I went back to historical romance, and I tried another author who was recommended for fans of Tessa Dare, and this was Kate Bateman. So I read A Reckless Match, which is the first book in the Ruthless Rivals trilogy, plus also some novellas. So the premise of this one, also Regency romance. I basically only read Regency and Victorian. I would be willing to read like an early 20th century historical romance, but I'm not really into medieval, which is also popular because I think just insufficiently feminist, and I don't believe a woman could be happy in the Middle Ages. I think that's what's going on with me psychologically. Of course, also lots of bad things happening to women in the 19th century. So, A Reckless Match. Well, let's talk about the prologue. The prologue, which is sort of a prologue for the entire series, explains the origins of the feud between the Welsh Davies family and the English Montgomery family. Their lands border each other right along the Welsh border down in the south. And one family stole a pig from the other family, and so they stole the pig back. And there was much conflict. I believe a pig did die. Long story short, almost a millennium of feuding between these two families. How could how could our two scions of each family possibly fall in love with each other? That's what the book is about. So our main characters are named Madeline Montgomery, and this name, which I believe in Welsh would be pronounced Gruffydd, this is shortened to Gruff, which I can't roll my R's, so just imagine I'm doing a better job of that. Which is not a very sexy name. I think she wants us to imagine that it's being pronounced Griff, but I'm going with Gruff, and you can't stop me. So our hero is named Gruff. These two are obviously to everybody else completely in love with each other, but not obvious to themselves. They're from the hated rival family. So they end up having to spend more time with each other when they sort of come upon a smuggling ring. And also, Maddie is dealing with the fact that her family is secretly broke, and her father is considering the option of marrying her off to a older, horrible, rich man in order to deal with that. So this book, was fine. It was not... The plot was moderately engaging. The clothing description was better than Alexandra Vasti, but as she still doesn't have it quite right, chemises did not have drawstring necklines in the early 19th century. I did find it a little bit dull, especially because I don't like this, and I feel like it's happening more and more. This is not a story about two people falling in love. This is a story about two people who are already in love, finally getting together. So I feel like I need to be sold on why they like each other more. I think it's kind of cheating if in your romance novel, the two characters start already liking each other. This was also a problem in some of Alexandra Vasti's work. In the first two, one person is already in love with the other. And in the Winnie Halifax story, I genuinely don't know why Spencer likes Winnie. He just sort of starts announcing that he finds her irresistible one day. And Winnie seems to like Spencer because he's just sort of nice and friendly. Which, there's worse reasons, but lots of people are nice and friendly. Why this guy? Sell me on your relationship. So yeah, I didn't like that they already liked each other. That said, I have started reading the later books in the series. This is about other members of the Davies and Montgomery families. And the books do seem to be improving. So if you are the sort of person who wants to read a complete series and you're willing to take the highs with the lows, take the lows with the highs, then I would say this is TBR maybe. If you're like, no, I'm not going to waste time on a book that I don't like and I'll figure out what's going on in the later books, then this is a pass. I gave this book 3.5 stars. And that's it for my April wrap-up. It's good to be back, guys. I'll see you next time.